The Boulder star illuminates every Christmas and is an iconic symbol of the holiday season. On Christmas Eve, the Ramseys drove up to Flagstaff Mountain, likely in their black Jeep Cherokee SUV, acquired that same year. We had dinner, the kids colored. After we left there, I think we drove up to the star. Might have driven a little bit to look at the lights. JonBenet was miffed because we wouldn't let her walk up to the star because she had on her church dress. It was a purple dress. That's from John Ramsey's Boulder police statement, June 1998. The Ramseys, parents and children, were well dressed, which meant getting out the vehicle and scrambling up to the star itself was pretty much out of the question. Burke wanted to go for it, but JonBenet was wearing the wrong shoes and a purple dress, the wrong attire for an uphill scramble. The four of us had attended the family Christmas Eve service at St. John's and had gone to Pastor Jay's afterward for dinner. Then we drove up Baseline Road all the way to the star, the star the city erects high on the rocky face overlooking Boulder. JonBenet wanted to get out and walk to the center of the big star, that outline in white lights. That is from Death of Innocence, page 239. Now, when I visited Boulder, I also ate at Pastor Jay's, and one cold night, I made sure to scramble up a treacherous slope you're actually not allowed to the Boulder star. JonBenet was upset that she wasn't allowed to climb towards the star. Well, you would be too. If you were so close with that enormous star shining like a magic ship in the blackness over your shoulder, you would be upset as well.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. One of the least discussed days in the Ramsey case is the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you are having a decent Christmas Eve. We know a lot about December 23rd, the Christmas party, the 911 call, the cops not being allowed in the house, and JonBenet crying because she didn't feel she was pretty. We know a lot about Christmas Day and the day after Christmas, as well as the 28th, the day the Ramseys gave their hair, blood and DNA samples, while Patsy's sister raided the crime scene, dressed in a police uniform or at least a jacket. We also know about the 29th, the memorial service held at the Episcopal Church, which sort of served as a look but don't touch, take photos but don't talk to us, PR exercise, and then the funeral in Atlanta on the 31st. And after that, the CNN interview on New Year's Day, 1997. Why is the day before Christmas so important? Well, because it sets a precedent. It provides a baseline from which to compare and contrast the events of the previous day and night. Everything from sleeping arrangements, did the kids have a bath, what were they wearing, what were they eating, when were they eating, and most important of all, who did they interact with? How much does Christmas have to do with what happened to JonBenet? If you took Christmas out of the equation, would JonBenet still be alive? What do you think? Before we get to that, and before we get to 6 insights from Christmas Eve, from the day before Christmas, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, if you enjoy my analysis, you might want to pick up my book, Christmas Star. It's doing quite well on the Amazon bestseller list. If you do read it, please leave a review, and I'll be sure to read it here on the channel. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Right, so 6 insights from Christmas Eve. What happens on Christmas Eve? What have you been doing on Christmas Eve? What are people around you doing on Christmas Eve? Well, I think it depends on whether you're an adult or a child, what your role is at Christmas in a particular family dynamic. If you're an adult, it might mean wrapping and even hiding gifts. It might involve cooking, cleaning, organizing, packing, dressing up. It might mean preparing a table, preparing for a trip, or preparing to receive guests. Christmas is, above all, a social interaction where people who don't necessarily often come together do And then there are also logistics involved with that, spending. And this can sometimes lead to feelings of joy and community, but it can also lead to feelings of disenchantment and unmet expectations for those who feel left out or shortchanged. One question I think we should ask is this, and I'm asking it again. How much does Christmas have to do with what happened to JonBenet? If you took Christmas out of the equation, would JonBenet still be alive? And what I think is quite ludicrous for those who believe in the intruder theory, really, you're going to choose Christmas, a time when people are the most involved with one another, when houses are the most full and busy and chaotic. You're going to choose that time to commit a crime like this, really? And so I actually think the answer to that is yes. JonBenet would still be alive if you just took Christmas right out of the equation. And so if that's true, how does Christmas play into that? And is Christmas more relevant to intruders lurking about, or is it triggering certain family dynamics in this particular case? So 6 insights from Christmas Eve. Let's start at number 1. Ramseys rejected a Christmas invitation. Did you know that? Let's go to the interview. Haney, did you get an invitation to a New Year's Eve party from a Carl Cumley and Francis Draper? Patsy, Francis Draper, I believe, was the inaudible, and I think I declined because I think we did get that, and I think I declined because we were going to be on the big red boat trip. Haney, do you know what would have happened to that invitation then? Patsy, she shakes her head. Where would it have been in your house? Patsy, well, I usually kept them kind of stuck behind because we were going to be on the big red boat trip. Now, this suggests that this invitation was for multi-days with some other people. Anyway, DeMuth says that was found outside the door leading to the patio. Do you have any idea how it got there? Patsy, I don't know. Trip DeMuth, you remember getting that invitation though, right? Patsy, I remember that. DeMuth, do you know how you got it? Was it hand-delivered, mailed? And then Patsy answers that question. Now, the rejected Christmas invitation informs us about the depth of the Ramseys' friendship circle and who was in their orbit. Does it take us anywhere meaningful? Not really, except that rejections on Christmas can sometimes sting a little, with adults but also with children. When it comes to family, well, it can sting a lot. And were there any of these kind of stings happening that we don't really know about? Number 2, did JonBenet wash her hands before dinner on Christmas Eve? Now, this may seem like an incidental question, except JonBenet's washing habits actually go hand in hand with her bedwetting habits. Bedwetting alone is one thing, bedwetting and unbrushed teeth is another. Bedwetting and not washing up, not once but often, starts to take an innocent accident into a completely different area. But there's a very important reason why we need to know when JonBenet washed her hands. Does anyone know the answer to that? Anyway, so DeMuth is asking her, did you guys get ready for dinner? Did somebody tell her, go wash your hands at the Whites? Do you remember anything like that? Patsy says, I don't know. DeMuth, how was she about washing her hands? Patsy, just a typical kid, if she can get by with it, she wouldn't do it, And then she says, but I was pretty much inaudible gesturing. DeMuth later goes on to say, how do you know there was a heart on her hand? Patsy says, because it was on there in the morning, that's why. DeMuth, and you remember it. Anyway, let's go to another interview, this time with John Ramsey. Kane, would you have gone to bathe that morning? Or she had one Christmas Eve. John Ramsey, she wouldn't have gotten one that morning. I remember the suit for that. Kane, I mean, after opening her presents and breakfast and whatever before. Anyway, so what is quite interesting there is this idea of when did this red heart, when was it drawn on JonBenet's hand? Was it drawn Christmas night or Christmas Eve? Number 3, what did they eat on Christmas Eve? Now, it's possible that's when they ate the pineapple. DeMuth says, my question is, does he ever go to the kitchen in the middle of the night and get something to eat? And this is related to Burke. Patsy says, no, not that I'm aware of. That scenario, sorry, is far-fetched. It's quite interesting that she's so defensive on that particular thing. She also said that from her bedroom, she could actually hear Burke visiting the bathroom. Now, it's interesting that the Ramseys actually moved in with Jay Lowski, the owner of Pastor Jay's, after the incident. And remember, they went to Pastor Jay's on Christmas Eve as well. The family also ate there quite often, once or twice a week. And as far as I know, John had a financial stake in that restaurant as well. By the way, there's a Pastor Jay's in Moab also. And of course, John Ramsey is now living in Utah. I've actually eaten at that Pastor Jay's as well. Now, meals, make no mistake, are also an important area. It shows to what extent families look after each other, how often they come together, and it raises the question, did Patsy often cook? Did she ever cook? What did she cook when she did cook? And what could she cook? And then also, what time did the kids usually eat? Where did they eat? Anyway, so Trip to Move says, and then Christmas Eve going backwards. Patsy says, Christmas Eve we went to church and we went to Pastor Jay's. And then a very interesting thing happens in this interview. DeMuth says, so spaghetti. Patsy says, yeah, no pineapple. DeMuth, after you came home from Pastor Jay's, ... But it's interesting that she says they didn't eat any pineapple at Pastor Jay's. Number 4, what did she wear on Christmas Eve? Now, the clothing the Ramseys wore on Christmas Eve, not only ordinary clothing, but underwear and pajamas, these are important in terms of knowing what to exclude in terms of the very important fiber evidence. Haney says, the ones that she was wearing, you said when you put her to bed Christmas night, she wasn't swimming or anything Christmas Eve. Patsy, no. Haney, at the Whites, or, they wouldn't have involved, or did it involve dressing up or trying things on? Patsy, no. Now, we also want to know what Patsy was wearing. What sort of gloves, what sort of fur was Patsy wearing? It's interesting that the Ramseys took a really long time to provide their clothing to law enforcement so that they could check and verify the fibers and cross-check them with what they'd found in terms of the evidence. Patsy goes on to answer, she had the long underwear pants and her little white shirt, and the night before, on Christmas Eve night, she wore the pink little something that was under her pillow. And remember in a previous video I was saying the Ramseys seemed to be the sort of family where the girls would wear pink and the boys would wear blue. And I think this supports the notion that clothing on the bathroom floor in JonBenet's room belongs to Burke. And then Haney also asks, how many nightgowns did JonBenet have? Then later on, Haney says, okay, just real briefly, this is K1KKY23, and this would have been taken Christmas morning. I think it's a number for a photograph. And that's where the children would have been dressed that morning and had slept Christmas Eve, Demuth. And the main reason we wanted to show you that, actually we've already answered the question. Early on we saw the pink top in the bed, right? So you'll notice what the officers are trying to do is basically to trace the clothing narrative, which clothing is moving from A to B inside the Ramsey house. Then another part of the narrative changed once a week unless she wet the bed, and then of course it would be changed, Haney, did you check the bed on, say, Christmas Day morning? Patsy, yeah. And then she says something else that's inaudible. Haney, okay, but you distinctly remember going and checking on that? Patsy, plus she had her pink pajamas on that she had put on the night before. If she had wet it, it would have been soaking wet and she wouldn't have had those on. Now, what is quite interesting is we've heard someone say that that JonBenet's bed really smelled of ammonia, that you could barely breathe, it was so pungent. And so that remains a question. Was the bed very dirty, and did JonBenet not want to sleep in her own bedroom? Which brings us to number 5, sleeping arrangements on Christmas Eve. The sleeping arrangements on Christmas Eve are so important in the Ramsey case, just as they were in the Madeleine McCann case. The pattern, the typical pattern of sleeping arrangements, what time did people go to bed, where did they go to bed, what time did they get up, that kind of thing, and even the Chris Watts case. And there's a very interesting inconsistency in this area. Look at where John is asked, where did Burke sleep on Christmas Eve? John answers, well, I think they slept in their own bedrooms. And it's quite interesting that he doesn't answer where Burke slept. He sort of answers it in a more generic way, and he doesn't sound very sure of himself. He sort of hedges the answer by saying, I don't specifically remember that. Now, that's not what Burke said. Burke said that JonBenet slept in his bedroom on Christmas Eve. His words were literally, I think she actually slept in my room. Now, let's go back to Tom Haney asking about JonBenet wetting the bed. Now, this is a very important area where you can either look at it as bedwetting and Patsy gets really upset, or another response to bedwetting, which is bedwetting and JonBenet doesn't want to sleep in her bed, and then that leads to some kind of change in behavior. Anyway, Haney says, do you recall if she wet the bed on Christmas Eve to Christmas morning? Patsy, no, she did not. Haney, how about going back from then, from Christmas morning? Do you recall when the last time was she was wet? Because we talked yesterday about the changing of the linen. You can see that Haney is persisting on this question. Number 6, Patsy's movements on Christmas Eve. Haney, what was the last time you were in the wine cellar? Was that Christmas Eve or Christmas Day? Patsy says probably Christmas Eve. And you can imagine her sort of wrapping gifts and busily preparing everything for this super duper Christmas for the kids. Haney goes on to ask, would there have been any reason for you to go back in there on Christmas Day, or did you go back in there? Patsy, no, I don't believe I did. No. Haney, okay, and on Christmas Eve when you went in there? Patsy, no. Haney, this wasn't there? Patsy, no. How about the blanket? Now, one thing that often happens over Christmas is parents hide Christmas gifts away from children. And what is quite interesting is that JonBenet's bike was hidden away, but apparently not Burke's. Was Burke's bike not taken to the neighbor as well? And if Burke's bike wasn't taken to the neighbor, well, then that shows a different attitude to JonBenet and trying to have her have a certain kind of Christmas versus Burke. The other thing that's quite interesting here is this idea of hiding Christmas gifts away. And bear in mind, the Ramseys would have a second Christmas in Michigan, so some of the Christmas gifts weren't given to the kids, and so all the more reason, even after Christmas, to see what gifts are still out there. And if the Christmas gifts were hidden in the basement and hidden in the wine cellar, then that's all the more reason why little children might want to go into the wine cellar to see what they were getting for Christmas. And isn't that how the high-tech shoe print got there in the first place? Because there was a gift down there that was torn open. Patsy said she tore it open, but why would she do that? Were you aware of that, the torn Christmas gift in the wine cellar? It was actually found beside JonBenet's body. Now, when we talk about the Ramsey case, we often talk about the dark stuff, and what could be darker than the body of a dead child lying under a Christmas tree? I do think there's a real legacy to this case, actually a dark legacy to this case, undermining the police, undermining trust, causing us to no longer believe in American values, this whole idea of can you trust parents? Do you know what's really going on with siblings? Can you trust the justice system? Can you believe an entire family that's kind of on trial? Can you believe them? Should you believe them? And all of it really leaves us feeling hollow, confused, and somehow manipulated. There's also not like a sense of closure. There's actually a sense of anxiety. But there's also a real Christmas star that floats above the real Boulder, where I've been told students, young people, scramble up there to sort of make out and be with those who they care about. And you can imagine it's quite a magical experience. You know, young lovers head up there to dance between the stars. And that's an America and a world we still want to believe in. And I think we still need to believe in, especially at this time of the year, that magic exists, that good people are out there, and that the good magic that involves realized dreams, hard work paying off, and a fair society that cares about itself and gets the good things it deserves. You know, this is a Christmas wish we must still make, perhaps on this star, in the same way that
a kiss may not be the truth, but it is what we wish were true.
And as long as we pine for kisses under the mistletoe and truth, it must mean there's still some good in us and some good luck floating somewhere out there in the fabric of the universe. Wherever you are, Merry Christmas. If you don't celebrate Christmas, hope you're having a good time. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time.